Now to style our header, let's go and look at the Illustrator sketch again. So we have our purple bar, which is 800 pixels wide and 75 pixels high. The overall length of the height of the header is 100 pixels. So the top nav takes 25 pixels of height, and it's right below the header. So back in Dreamweaver, I place my cursor in the header, go down to Selectors, and click Add Selector. Now, since I have only one header in the page, I can delete the hash container, leaving only hash header as the selector, and it'll work just fine. Now coming up to the properties, I set the width to 800 pixels, the height to 100 pixels, and for the margin, so I can just set all the four values, the top, right, bottom, and left margins together by going to Set Shorthand and typing 0px. Same thing for the padding. I'm going to set the padding on all sides to be 0 pixels. So when I type in the shorthand, it automatically sets all the four values and links them for me. When the chain is on, all four values, the top, right, bottom, and left, are connected. Next, we'll set the background color for the header. So over in Illustrator, I go in and look at my color with the color picker, click on the purple color, and that gives me the hex code, which is a web design friendly code that Illustrator gives me, making it very easy for me to apply this color in Dreamweaver. I just select this code, right click, and copy. Go back to Dreamweaver, select my header, go up to background color, and I paste it. But I need to be careful that I leave the hash symbol in there. And as soon as I paste the value in front of the hash, Dreamweaver recognizes the purple color. I just hit enter and my header background turns purple. Now I'll replace the sample text with the logo image. So I select the sample text, delete it. Now notice that my cursor jumps into the list, and that's not where I want to place the image. I want to be careful where my cursor is when I bring in my logo image. So to be sure that I'm inserting it in the right place, I'm going to look over in the code section and place my cursor right after the opening of the header div. Then I go Insert, Image, Image, find my logo, and bring it in. And there it is. If I go back to my Illustrator file, I'll just turn off the labels, and I can see that my logo is snugly fitting against the purple bar, looking like it's actually getting cropped. So I can do that in Dreamweaver, but I need to shift it up. And the easiest way to do that is to use absolute positioning. First, I need to add a CSS selector for my logo. Go down to Properties and notice that even images have an ID field. So I can type an ID of logo for my logo image. In my code, you can see that Dreamweaver has added an ID of logo to this image. So now I can style it really easily. I go over to the CSS selectors with my logo selected, click Add Selector, and Dreamweaver gives me a very specific address. All I really need is logo, since I have only one logo image in the whole page. To position my logo using absolute positioning, I also need to position the header using absolute positioning. So I click on header, scroll down to position, change this to absolute. Then I click on my logo and do the same. Now notice what happens on our page. Things look a little messy. That's because when I set any element to absolute positioning, it stops pushing down the divs or the elements that follow it in the code. So in our case, the header is no longer pushing down the left nav and the content divs. This is how absolute positioning works. When you use absolute positioning, you position your elements relative to the top of the page of the browser window. And the elements that follow it pretty much ignore the elements with absolute positioning, and they also start right at the top. But we will fix that when we get to the left nav and content later. For now, I want to finish my header. So I click on the logo image, and you will see that Dreamweaver has created this yellow box around my header and also another box around my logo. This box shows me that it's absolute positioning. And if I wanted, I could just click and drag this box to position my logo precisely where I wanted to on the page. That actually looks pretty good, but I want to be sure that I have a good position. So I'll go over to the CSS properties and come over to position, and notice as I dragged it around, I gave it a top value of -10 pixels, which means the top edge of this logo is sitting 10 pixels above the top edge of my header. And that looks pretty good to me. I might adjust it, bring it down 1 pixel. And on the left side, I want to give it some more space. So I'll give it about 5 or 6 pixels. And now coming back to the design view, that's what I was looking for. So the logo is positioned well in the header. Now all I have to do is take my top nav and reposition it, give it the right colors, and move it down below the purple band. It's getting a little hard to select my top nav because it's overlapping with the logo. So instead of trying to mess with it over here, I'll just come over into the code section, click on the div ID top nav, and it gets highlighted here. Now I can go over to the right side, add a selector for it, simplify my selector since there's only one top nav in the whole page, and I want to set the height of my top nav to 25 pixels, and I want to move it down so that it sits at the bottom of my header. And the way I can do that is I want to push it down by about 75 pixels so that I have 75 pixels of purple followed by the top nav. The best way to do that in this case is to give it a top margin of 75 pixels. So I come over to margin, set my top margin to 75 pixels, hit enter, and watch. This is the margin of 75 pixels that pushes my top nav down till it sits in the perfect place for me. I'm also going to give my top nav a background color of white. So I have my top nav selected here. I go up to background, choose white, that's the code for white, and hit enter. And here's what it looks like. So you can see how my header is starting to resemble what I have in my sketch. But my top navigation menu itself is not looking like what I want here. So that's where I'm going to go next and style it. First, I want to get all these list items to show up in a straight line. Then give the list itself a gray background color and change the text color to white. So back in Dreamweaver, now it's getting hard to select things over here. So again, I'm going to go back to my code section, click top nav, but I actually want to style the list that's inside the top nav. So I click UL, come over to the right side and add a selector. Now once again, I can simplify the selector because there's only one top nav on my page, so I don't need to specify that it's the one inside header. I can take that out. So this selector says I'm selecting the bulleted list or the unordered list, UL, which is inside my top nav. So first, I would like to turn off the bullet points themselves. For that, I go over to text, scroll down and set list style type, which allows you to set the list marker. Set that to none. It's a little hard to see here, but the bullet points disappeared. Now I want to take all those links in my top nav, get them to show up in a straight line. To do that, I actually need to style my list items themselves. So again, on the left side, under top nav UL, I go inside any of the list items, doesn't matter which one, come over to selectors, click add selector, and there you have it, top nav UL LI. The first thing I'll do is set the display to inline. And as soon as I do that, you'll notice they went from a vertical list to a horizontal list. Again, there's a lot of overlap going on here, but as you can see, it starts with blog and ends with contact, all in a straight line, which is what I have over here. It'll be easier to see if I can just right align this at this point. So I go back to my top nav UL, and to take this entire list and right align it, I go over to my layout properties, scroll down to where I see float, and click right. There you have it. Now my list shows up all the way on the right side. I see I have some extra spacing before and after the list, so I'm going to set my margins to 0 and see what that does. So again, on top nav UL, I scroll up to margin and set all the margins to 0 pixels. And that did it. Now that got rid of the extra space and my top nav looks a lot better. Now I can go ahead and set the background color to gray. I go back to Illustrator, select my top nav, go to the color picker and copy the color code, come back to Dreamweaver. I still have my top nav UL selected. I go over to background color and paste it in front of the hash sign. Hit enter and my top nav list turns gray. I would like to add some padding inside my top nav UL, so there's a little bit of space, some breathing room around my text. So I go back to top nav UL, back to layout, and set the padding to something like 3 pixels. And that adds some more space around my text, making it look much better, much closer to what I had in my sketch. Last thing, under top nav UL, I'm going to set the text color to white. So I go to text, color, white, hit enter, and there you go. Now my header is getting very close to my sketch. I still need to set the font, tweak the spacing a little bit, and then set up the vertical dividers between my links. But for now, this demo gives you a good start on formatting your own web page using CSS. We've gone over how to set the width and height of the elements, how to use absolute positioning to precisely align your elements, how to set background colors, text colors, how to bring in images and position them. So have fun designing your own web page, following the guidelines and the workflow that I've outlined in this video, and looking forward to see how your work turns out.